So FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 1932, he's running for his first presidential election. He's the governor of New York at the time, and is married to Eleanor. She became our most active first lady in history. She was quite amazing. Fought for women's rights, children's rights, huge advocate of education. Just a really astounding woman. They nearly got divorced at one point early in their marriage because he had an affair, which turned out to be an ongoing affair. So she found out about it, and she told him that she would divorce him. She'd be happy to do that if that was what he wanted. And his mother got involved, and his mother went to Eleanor and said, "You can't do that because it'll ruin him politically. So you have to stay married to him for his sake." So she did. She toughed it out, kind of turned a blind eye on the affair. And that affair would continue with Ms. Myers until Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed away. When he died in 1945, his mistress was at his bedside in Georgia, where his spa was. Because of his polio, his life was very painful, and he built a spa in Warm Springs, Georgia, because he swore that the waters were very healing and soothing to him. So he was there when he died, and his mistress was with him. Interesting, huh? So anyway, back to history. Franklin Roosevelt, in 1932, in one of his election speeches, his campaign speeches, he said that the country needs and demands bold, persistent experimentation. It is common sense to take a method and try it. If it fails, admit it frankly, and try another. But by all means, above all, try something. So essentially the accusation here by Roosevelt is Hoover's not really doing anything. He's taking a poke at it here or a poke at it there to try and fix the Depression, but he's not really taking it seriously. He thinks that we're all, these resilient people that are just going to bounce back. Well, that's not the case. This is a situation where bounce back was not an issue, okay? It's not going to work for us because the Depression it affected so many people in such a harsh way. People weren't just going to bounce back from this. They needed a hand up or a hand out, depending on your perspective. So maybe that's something to think about. Now, 1932, the election happens in November, of course, and the Republicans are going to put forward Hoover again, okay? They're going to stick with their guy. And the Democrats put forward FDR. Now, we've talked about his history a bit. He has a very deep political history, opposite party from his fifth cousin, Teddy Roosevelt. And speaking of cousins, did you know that Eleanor was his cousin, his wife? They were about third cousins, so fairly distant. But she did not have to change her last name when she got married. Nice, huh? So anyway, his platform when he runs for president is to end prohibition. He believes that it's bad for the economy, that we could make a lot of money in taxes off of liquor, and why not? We could regulate it better, and we wouldn't be spending all this money on trying to criminalize it. Balance the budget. He ought to talk to today's Congress about that. But he wants to have a balanced budget where you spend what you bring in, not more than you bring in. He also wants to have sweeping economic and social reforms. Now, that is going to be the genesis of the New Deal, are these sweeping economic and social reforms. He believes that we absolutely need them. Hand up or hand out, we need them. FDR is going to win big. He really appeals to the people of this country. They all love him, okay? For the first time in history, African Americans throw their support behind the Democratic Party. They had been the party of Lincoln since, well, Lincoln. And the African American community really throws their weight behind FDR. He really makes an effort, much to Eleanor's prompting, he makes an effort to really reach out to the African American community, and it works because they voted for him big time. All right. So when he gets into office, he's inaugurated on March 5th, 1933. And when he gets into office, the New Deal is what he proposes. Now, New Deal is going to take place over, most of the legislation happens during his first 100 days in office. So March 5th to about June 16th or so. That's when the first 100 days happens, and that's where We see much of the New Deal legislation. He puts together what's called a brain trust. He takes the best and brightest intellectuals in the United States, a lot of college professors, and he puts them together in a team to come up with the appropriate legislation to get us out of this Great Depression. March 6th through 10th, the day after he's inaugurated, until the 10th of March in 1933, he declares a banking holiday. All banks are going to be shut down for business. You cannot withdraw your money. You cannot deposit money. We're going to close them up because there was a run on the banks. Everybody was going to the banks and taking out their money, and that's not good for banking because banks don't have that kind of money in their stash to be able to cash out everybody that comes along. So banks were going bust. 5,000 of them went belly up because everybody was running to the banks to take out their money. So Roosevelt says, all right, we're going to calm everybody down. Everybody's going to take a breath. We're going to have a 5-day banking holiday starting now. And so that's what they do. And it works. People really took a breath. The banks were able to recoup. And people were able to rest easily knowing that their money was really okay. The 3 R's are going to be the backbone of the New Deal. So you have relief, recovery, and reform. Now, relief means that we have to stop the hurt. We have to stop the bleeding. We have to apply immediate relief to people who desperately need it. If they're hungry, feed them. If they're cold, clothe them. If they're out of work, employ them. Do something to stop the pain. Recovery is it's a fix, but it's a short-term, quick fix. It's something that you do to alleviate and help move the person forward and prepare them for their future. So that's the kind of bills that would come up in recovery. And then reform are the long-term systematic changes that have to take place in order for us not to experience a Great Depression again. So that's going to be the reform aspect of this, and you'll see several of those as we go through these different bills. Now, relief. What kinds of relief are we offering here? Well, unemployment insurance. If you were unemployed, the government would give you money. They still do that today. And we provide money for people who have lost their jobs. Okay? How do you pay for that? Well, we have an unemployment tax in your paycheck. You have a tax taken out that helps pay for unemployment. And that's what that does. All right? Old age insurance, otherwise known as Social Security. The government's going to take a portion of your paycheck, withhold it in an account for you, and when you get old, you can collect that money. Well, we know that that doesn't work today because we collect a lot more money than the government takes out of our paychecks. But Social Security was crucial at the time that it was passed, even though it was only a few dollars a month, between $10 and $85 a month. But it was really crucial to help old people survive. It was really meant as a sort of cushion. It wasn't really meant as a sustainable income. Minimum wage. Now, minimum wage was only a few cents an hour, about 40 cents an hour in 1930s, but still establishing a minimum wage that you must pay every employee at least this per hour. That was essential, and we still have a minimum wage today. It's much higher than 40 cents an hour, but still happens today. Conservation. We have to also think about the environment. Roosevelt, much like his fifth cousin Teddy, was a big-time conservationist. He believed in protecting the earth. And who better to protect the earth than young men who are unemployed? And we'll get to that in a second. But conservation was big on his radar. And then child labor laws. We have to protect the children. So for the first time in history, it becomes illegal for children under the age of 16 to work. And under 18, you couldn't do dangerous work. Okay? So really protect the kids. Okay? How many hours they could work, how often they should get a break, what kind of money they should make, all of that stuff. Now, banking. How do we handle the banking crisis in this country with 5,000 banks going belly up? Well, the Emergency Banking Relief Act was passed in 1933, and that's going to provide assistance to the banks, give them loans, whatever they need to get them back on their feet again. Okay? And how does Roosevelt introduce all of this? Well, of course, he does 30-some fireside chats to let people know this is where we stand. This is where the country is. We want to calm your fears. And so his voice came through the radio waves every week or so to tell people where we stood as a country. It was essential, especially through the Great Depression, World War II, fireside chats were really crucial. The Glass-Steagall Banking Reform Act. Now, notice that this is reform. This is reform. It's not recovery. This is reform because it created something that still exists today and is a crucial part of our banking system today. It changes the way banks operate because it creates the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, which means that your money, when you put it into the bank, it's insured. Back then, it was insured up to $5,000. Now it's insured about $250,000. So that's a good thing. You didn't have to worry. If the bank got robbed, the bank burned down, the bank went out of business, your money was safe. Now, he also takes us off the gold standard. Whoa! William Jennings Bryan's going crazy. He takes us off the gold standard because he realizes that it just wasn't good for our dollar at that point. So what happens to our money? Well, we have an inflation of sorts, and gold becomes very hard to get, so the price of gold goes up. He's actually able to put us back on a limited gold standard later in his term because people were selling their gold to the U.S. government because the price was up a little bit from where it was, so people were anxious to get rid of their gold. They'd probably flip if they saw the price of gold today. So he takes us off the gold standard for a time, puts us back on a limited gold standard, but later in his term. Inflation, it's a good thing here. Why is it a good thing? Because when your money inflates, it makes it easier to pay off your debt. Now, who's it bad for? Well, the people who gave you those loans. The people who extended you the loans, they're not going to get the quality or the worth of the money, the value of the money that they intended to get. They're just going to get the paper that shows it's the same amount, the paper bills. It's not really worth the same. But it helped the majority of Americans. And in this particular case, FDR was looking out for the masses versus a few. And that's what was important.